The primary purpose of Uniquely Human, the podcast, is to educate and inform. The views expressed during all episodes are solely those of the individuals involved and do not constitute educational or medical advice. Listeners should consult with professionals familiar with each individual or family for specific guidance.
Uniquely Human, the podcast, is produced by Elevated Studio. Music is graciously provided by Matt Savage of Savage Records.
Hi, I'm Dr. Barry Prezant, clinical scholar, researcher, and consultant on autism and neurodiversity, and a Brooklyn boy raised in the big city.
And I'm Dave. I'm none of those things, and I grew up on a farm in Illinois. But being on the spectrum myself, I have plenty of personal insight to lend.
And this is Uniquely Human, the podcast, a show that illuminates and celebrates autism and neurodiversity. Today on Uniquely Human, the podcast, we have a very, very special discussion, and that is about an issue of Autism Spectrum news that just came out, and you will have the link on the page associated with this episode. And it focuses on non-speaking individuals and so many aspects of their life. And we have two very special guests. We have Jen Binder Lepape with us. Hi, Jen.
Delighted to be here. Thanks for having me.
And hi, Amy.
Hey,
Laurent.
Barry.
Yeah,
Hey, Dave.
Hello. And by the way, Amy joins us as a very part of an exclusive community as a three-peat.
Yes. A three-peat. My goodness. So you get to hear her melodic tones and words of wisdom again. So we're very excited about that.
It's a service. It's value added that we bring to our listening community.
And now a little bit more about our guest today. Jen works in strategy consulting with a focus on technology, media, and telecom. She is the mother of two adult children, one of whom is a non-speaking autistic who communicates via spelling and typing. She was a co-plaintiff in Lepape versus Lower Merion School District in Pennsylvania, a case that centered on the ADA's effective communication clause. She is also a member of Voices for Choice, a group working to expand housing options for disabled adults. And Amy is a PhD in developmental psychology and an occupational therapist, but I think that's your true nature, OT, right? Is the co-director of Autism Level Up, a neurotypical neurodivergent partnership dedicated to the provision of education, accessible resources, and practical strategies focused on increasing active engagement for autistic individuals and members of their communities. She is a co-author of The CERTS Model, I think I've heard of that somewhere, and frequently lectures internationally. She is passionate about neurodiversity and helping others to honor and understand the implications of different ways of being in relation to navigating the physical and social world. And Amy strives to practice what she preaches and uses her love of play and movement to meet her own regulatory needs. Okay, so the issue of Autism Spectrum news is such a rich issue, and that's what we really want to focus on today. And you might wonder why Jen and why Amy and why me? We have become kind of compatriots in the last 2 years, I would say, regarding a legal action that Jen maybe wants to talk about a little bit more as we move ahead, and actually was the focus of one of the articles in this issue. But I think one thing we would like to do is to make sure that we're clear on some issues that have created misunderstandings regarding non-speakers and ways to support non-speakers. So I'm going to toss out a few items, and then I'm going to have Amy and Jen respond to those items in terms of trying to get a clearer understanding and put some of the misunderstandings to rest. So one of the big issues that's discussed is a term many people are familiar with now, and that is presuming competence. So, Jen or Amy, you want to take the lead on that and help us understand it more clearly?
Sure. I'd be happy to because I agree with you, Barry. I think this is widely misunderstood. I think it has been distorted to mean every autistic or disabled person is a hidden genius. And to me, that's not what it means at all. It means that every person is an expert in their own life. Um, and that they deserve being spoken to directly and not through a caregiver. They deserve, even if they can't communicate, hearing things in age-appropriate language. They deserve to fully participate in the measure they can in all the decisions that have their life, regardless of whether they're a genius, average, or intellectually disabled, right? It's that presume that they have a role to play and agency in their own life. Um, and I do think that's really important for all of us to keep in mind.
Yes,
I
and
think
that
there's another aspect too, Jen, that I think people need to keep in mind is when we talk about presuming competence, we're talking about presuming the ability to learn, right? When we present those opportunities and those options
Yeah,
and that information, they might not know yet, but we have the ability to scaffold and teach and help them because they have the ability to learn. And
yes,
that's the presumption of competence. It's not that they know everything.
right,
It's that if we get our support right, they can learn. And as you said, not everyone's going to learn everything, right?
right.
And somebody
Yeah.
might be learning quantum physics, and somebody else is going to be learning how to make the decision of what they want for dinner. And those are both
Mhm.
really important abilities to support for two different people.
Mhm.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
and that was actually one of the themes that came out in the what is it, 40 articles that
Right.
are in this issue. So many individuals, and I think 17 of them were authored or co-authored by non-speakers, and so many of them said, I was able to learn, but I was not being taught in a way that I could learn, and that was important. I think another issue that is an issue of debate is the role of neuromotor issues for non-speakers. So, how about that? Why don't we start with Amy?
I'll let the OT start, I was going to say.
Well, I think that we know that there are many factors that are part of why there's a large percentage of autistic individuals who are non-speakers, right? They say upwards of 30% of autistic individuals will not develop reliable spoken language. And one of those factors that we look at is motor ability and praxis. And you'll hear a lot of people talking about apraxia. And for a long time, people focused on oral motor praxis, and can people form speech sounds and those types of things. But now people are kind of like taking a step back and understanding these issues of praxis are actually global issues for individuals, which impact kind of all aspects of interacting with the environment, which means things like praxis and motor planning, not just for producing speech sounds, but for being able to use American Sign Language or British Sign Language or other form of sign, gestural communication, being able to reliably get their body to move in ways that they're thinking that they want to move their body is impacted. And there's a large body of research is emerging. I mean, I would say, gosh, even 25-ish years ago, people were looking at neuromotor differences in infants, and is that a way we could reliably
Hmm.
detect a a child who was likely to be identified as autistic in their future and based on how they rolled. And there was good evidence that we could look at babies and look at motor differences. And now that's really extending into kind of more global aspects of understanding like motor experiences throughout the world and how it really influences so many different things. And people like Elizabeth Torres are doing amazing research looking at
Hmm.
just really fine, detailed differences in motor and consistently demonstrating statistically significant differences in autistic profiles and not autistic profiles. So this motor piece is really real,
Hmm.
like really real.
And Jen, you communicate with and know many non-speakers, and now that some of them are able to communicate about motor issues, what do they say?
Well, it's fascinating. They talk frequently about this disconnect between what they want to do and how that message gets translated to their bodies. But it presents differently in different individuals. Some individuals have difficulty initiating an action, right? Even if they're hungry to get up and get something or cold to get a blanket. I think Ido Kadar talks about this in one of his books, right? Other people get stuck in loops where they do the same action repetitively, and it's the stopping that's hard. And then other times it's just having the energy to really force the concentration that's required for spelling and typing, because these unruly bodies require a lot more effort than I think a lot of the neurotypical bodies. And so it's fascinating to me because it is both a very common theme, but the specific presentations vary significantly from individual to individual.
Let's go to the next possible misunderstanding. I won't say possible, it is. And that is, we know that a major argument of some of the critics is that, wait a second, this is not authentic communication. They're being 100% influenced by people who are with them. And they present people who are supporting different kinds of approaches through spelling and typing as if we're ignoring the factor of influence. Is that the case?
I have to say, in my training, just as a parent, and I haven't been formally trained as a practitioner, but the issue of influence was always present. I can remember doing a 2-hour seminar once I was a more open partner for Alex, just about influence, about how to ask questions, how to phrase them, and all the different ways you can influence someone. So for me, this has always been present. It's a real risk, but it's also one that I think is quite addressable with thoughtful practice.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. What do you think, Amy?
I absolutely agree. And I guess I gotta want to take a bigger picture step back again and say all communication is relational. All communication, your partner influences the message that you're sending because you're responding to the other person in interaction. And when we're talking about supporting non-speakers, some of them are going to be spellers and typers, and we need to think in the way that you're talking, Jen, about that type of influence. But some of them will be using other assistive technology devices. Some of them might be using sign language. And if we think about how we teach those methodologies, there is always a partner helping to teach somebody how to use whatever methodology they're using to communicate. So a partner is always a part of it. And I think one of the things that we all need to be, regardless of the methodology that we're helping to support, is recognize how we're helping support somebody in making those choices or in sharing their thought or their message, right? So there is no communication method that is learned outside of an interaction with another person. And if there's an interaction with another person, there's always going to be a opportunity for influence, I suppose. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's not even person to person. I can't type a single text message on my phone nowadays without Apple telling me, "Oh, did you mean to say, did you mean to say ballpark instead of, tennis racket?" Like, no, I didn't. But eventually, it's insisting that I spelled something wrong, and I just say, "Fine, I meant ballpark. I didn't mean I want to buy a tennis racket. Yes, I want to buy an entire arena." So, like,
It's so true, though.
it's everywhere. And the other thing too is I just have to wonder. Now, I'm not a clinician, academic. I'm basically an armchair non-expert. So I have
Welcome to the club.
but I have spoken with a number of, non-speaking individuals, and I guess the burning question I always have for anybody who challenges this method of communication where it's sort of assisted by another human being is sort of wouldn't there have been at some point ever the non-speaker figuring out some way to basically express that, hey, this person's manipulating. That's not what I intended to say. They're misrepresenting, what I'm saying. That has never, it's come up maybe, to my knowledge, maybe 0 times. Like you would think that there would be some signal or there'd be some evidence that these people are not autonomously communicating, or that their communicative intent is not being respected
That's right.
by their support person. And it's just not true, as far as I know.
It's interesting you say that, David, because one of the things that I remarked early on is I have never seen a speller that has required ABA type rewards to
Mm.
continue spelling, even for long sessions, even for 2-hour book clubs. There is no reward other than the intrinsic reward of learning and communicating and the social interaction. And that has always struck me because these are individuals who often there was very little time between when they left self-contained classrooms where that was the norm, right? And it was assumed to be necessary for any type of sustained attention or learning to these. And I'm like, why would they do it, right? If there
Mhm.
wasn't that intrinsic value of making a community, of communicating, of belonging. So I think that's a great observation.
That brings up a recent memory. Not too long ago, I was with Elaine Hall, who does have an article in the ASN issue about the Miracle Project program called Express Yourself for
Mm.
non-speakers. And it was with her son Neil and with the Speller's Method with Dawn Marie Gavin in Southern California. And we were sitting there listening, watching some of the first lessons he was getting and the support he was getting from that perspective. And Elaine said to me, I have never seen Neil stay so focused and be so motivated to learn this that he was riveted and he was like, give me more. I want to take it in because this is going to help me to communicate more effectively. It was very, very striking. Okay, here's another one. How about that this is a miracle? All of a sudden these miracles are happening overnight. Uh, is it just a miracle where you snap your fingers and all of a sudden a person is a fluent speller or typer?
I wish. I'm sure that would make a lot of people happy. I mean, I know in our case, it probably took Alex 3 or 4 months of working with trained professionals for an hour twice a week, and then doing smaller bits of practice at home to become an open communicator. And and then it probably took an additional 3 months for me to learn how to support him, for him to be open at home. He was open with the professionals before kind of I had built my own skill set. Um, in my experience, it generally takes, fast is 3 to 4 months, and it can take a year or more for people to sort of learn the motor skills, to learn how to regulate their bodies. So it is a process that requires a lot of effort. And again, I think it speaks to the motivation of the non-speakers to want to communicate. They're willing to put in the time. But in my experience, it's a much longer process than an overnight miracle.
And Jen, I think, again, it depends on the profile of the young person. It depends on not necessarily a young person. Sometimes adults are learning this
Yeah, absolutely.
methodology. So what their experience is, I mean, all individuals will have had some exposure to the alphabet, but how people presume competence around them with that alphabet and help them understand and make sense of it. I know one young woman that I have known for ages now. She's now an open speller, but like 2 year journey, right?
Mhm.
And she's at this point not reading great texts, but she is making decisions about her life that are making huge impact on her quality of life. So I think it really depends on how old, what the exposure is, who the young person is or the older person is from a cognitive profile, and then just what that kind of connectedness is. But it's no different than any other communication method,
Mhm.
right? If we're using a picture-based communication method, it's going to take time for someone to know how to use that, especially if you're moving from single words to make a request into multi-word, multi-picture utterances to share a sentence or an idea. Like the bridge, it all takes time. It's just like in typical development of any language skill, spoken language, children start with vocal approximations, move into single words, then we get to word combinations, which will eventually lead into sentences, right? So language development takes time. It isn't like put this thing in front of somebody and it's a miracle.
Right. And then I think on top of that, there's a language component, and there's what you're talking about earlier about for people with apraxia, just mastering the motor skills, even if they might have more advanced mental language
Yep,
skills, right? But how to get that to output,
absolutely.
is an additional challenge for a lot of this population.
Mhm.
Can you even, I say this every time this topic is discussed, but can you even imagine the personal frustration of knowing exactly what you want to do, exactly what you want to say, and your body shuts it down? It's just, it's in my head and I can't get it out. I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
Anything we can do to make this easier and more reliable for people, we should be doing.
And another topic that's addressed in some of the articles, the mental health issues and the ramifications. So I have one more that one more item that often is tossed out there. And that is for those individuals who begin to spell or type, and people are surprised at how much they either knew about something or what they observed about something. And many of the critics say, well, they've never been explicitly taught to read. They don't look like they're learning. How could they have this information in their minds, in their brains, if they never formally went through school like other kids or participated in those kinds of learning activities? So what do we say about that? I guess it brings up the issue of everyday incidental learning that happens in human beings, right?
Yeah, also, when were schools invented? I guarantee it wasn't when mankind first crawled out of the swamps. But I'll let the experts talk. Sorry.
No, I think it is a great point. Like schools are a relatively recent invention in human history. I think that, we're hardwired to learn and to observe and absorb from our environment. I would also say, have these people never heard of Children's Television Workshop? Like,
Right?
no, but seriously, right? Like if you think about and what's fascinating to me is I know in the case of my son Alex, and this is true of others, loved Sesame Street as a toddler. As he was an older toddler, moved into loving starfall.com, which is an online learning support tool. Like has always loved and been fascinated by these things because I think he found a self-paced way to sort of access some of that learning that he wasn't getting in
Mhm.
autistic support classrooms,
Mhm.
right? Um,
And non-speaking does not mean non-thinking. Uh,
indeed,
Oh, and
indeed.
it goes back to that presumption of competence that you asked us about earlier too, Barry. And I think about what kids learn in school, and schools absolutely there's value there, and curriculum's important and whatever, but some of the brightest minds are learning outside of school. Like
mhm.
where they're really absorbing and applying is not like on the spelling test and the times tables. It's like that integration, hands-on, exploratory type of learning that doesn't happen necessarily in a traditional classroom.
And
There's
some,
an anecdote from when my son is younger, and Alex is a minimal speaker. So he has some words, basic requests and things, but he is much more expansive and eloquent when he spells.
Right.
When he was probably about 5 or 6, we bought a trampoline for the backyard. My husband's French. We initially raised Alex bilingual, but we pulled back because we didn't want to further complicate language acquisition. But we continued to speak to our younger son in French. And Alex, but nothing explicit with Alex. And my husband came home from work, and my Alex always preferred jumping with him on the trampoline because my husband could send them up higher. And he was like, jump, jump, jump. And he's like, Alex, it's hot. I got to get changed. And all of a sudden, Alex breaks in and he goes, Papa, sauter, which is jump in French. And my husband and I just look at each other like, excuse me. So not only was he listening to what we were doing with Benjamin, he was picking up on the emotional manipulation that comes with, oh,
Mhm.
when you speak French, they're more likely to do it because they're trying to reinforce it. And it was just mind blowing. And again, there was nothing planned. If anything, we were trying to shield him from the complexity of 2 languages. But
Mhm.
when he was motivated, out that game.
And hearing impaired and deaf people who are not exposed to formal learning of language, yet they're taking in a ton of information about the world.
Yeah.
And by the way, this is kind of something our listeners might want to check in on. I just had a discussion with a New York Times writer who's doing an article on Jason Arday. Jason Arday is a man from the UK, autistic, diagnosed when he was young, and he did not begin speaking till he was 11. He did not become literate until he was 18, and now he is a full distinguished professor at Cambridge University in England, and he's a fluent speaker. And you could see him on some interviews that are on YouTube. I'd never heard about him. And this person who I spoke with, her name is Susan, whatever, and she is coming out with an article about him in the New York Times in August.
Fascinating.
And so there are individual examples of people not only just taking in so much of the world and then learning to express that knowledge that they have, but there are extreme examples like that. And what Jason says was his mom in particular was always very good at pointing things about the world out to him and speaking with him about everything and narrating and describing. And he said, I was just absorbing it like a sponge. I just couldn't speak. Fascinating. So anyway, I'd like our listeners to know, yes, these are wonderful misunderstandings that we're trying to get straight here, but we also touched on a number of topics that are actually embedded into the issue. But let's get right back to the issue now, okay? And we could be even a little bit more specific. So we could do some turn taking here. And Jen and Amy, would you like to share what, some of the aha moments for you that came out of reading some of the articles? Again, 17 of which were authored or co-authored by non-speakers. That's almost half of the articles in the issue.
Well, Barry, I think that's a great segue for me, if it's okay, Amy.
Yeah, go for it.
To start, because the first thing that I saw that I just thought was so phenomenal was how many articles, sorry, were co-authored by both neurotypicals and non-speakers. And that was across, people working. My own son wrote with his psychiatrist and his therapist. Another person wrote with their general practice doctor. Another gentleman from Toronto talked about some of the researchers that he works with, or some of the professors at Stony Brook. In Long Island, where he's part of the LEN program. And I thought, to me, this was a real highlight of the issue, because that collaboration, that participation, the neurotypicals sort of saying, not just is this an interesting topic, but these are interesting collaborators. I'm learning from working with them. And to me, that was just a wonderful sort of underlying meta message of the issue.
And I think that absolutely popped out for me. And the other part was just how the issue is able to kind of look at the lives of non-speakers holistically. So there are articles in there that are looking at mental health. They're looking at participation in activities that bring enjoyment for individuals. They're looking at the importance of communication in being able to feel that there's some sense of autonomy. And that kind of goes back to what you were saying, Dave. Can you imagine the frustration of not having that ability to connect and to communicate? And so there's all of those pieces. And then the other part that stuck out for me was how many of the authors are writing. They're really thinking about how to support these individuals in relational ways. Like, what does meaningful support look like for our non-speakers, and how do we make sure we're providing support in ways that account for the differences that we've been talking about? So I think, there's this kind of like burgeoning like knowledge, like you're talking about, Jen, and this recognition of all of these different aspects. And then there's also this, aspect of let's look at these individuals as individuals with full lives, and let's make sure we're doing our part to get support right for them.
And
what
the
about
art.
you, Barry? Can I throw that back at you? I mean, you know this world very well. What struck you from the collection?
I think once again the range, everything from the arts to legal issues written by lawyers. I mean, it's just it so many things impact the lives of non-speakers as whole human beings.
Yes.
And I think the argument has been so distilled down to, is it real or is it not? And we're leaving out the lives and the experiences.
Mhm.
We're leaving out, Jen, as you just said, how many people enter the lives of non-speakers as collaborators, as medical professionals, as people in other ways, as family members. A number of the articles are written by family members. So I think it's the richness of the issue, and it's not a myopic view of kind of the arguments that most people are exposed to with some of the recent New York Times articles
Right.
and things such as that. And I think it's important for those people maybe who are not as fully immersed in some of these issues as we are to
Mhm.
get that rich sense of the lives of non-speakers and what they have to say. I think it's so important.
Yeah, I mean, any dismissal of nuance in a topic as important as this is really just the luxury of people who want to be intellectually lazy.
Yep.
Or if the nuance and lived experience aspect of all of this hurts their argument, of course, let's dismiss it and let's narrow it down to just one talking point or another. I really think it's important, like you mentioned, Barry, the contribution of family members, loved ones, friends in this discussion.
Absolutely essential. One thing I just struck me. I don't want our listeners to think that number one, we edited this issue. We did not. Um, that the issue came about because in a discussion that we had, we were saying we want something that was accessible, readable for many, many people, free and online. Okay. And so we approached knowing Autism Spectrum News. I've published a few articles over the last many years in that, and people I know have published some articles in that. And as a matter of fact, some previous guests on our podcast have published articles in that. So we just approached the editor in chief, David Minot, and just said, "Is this a topic that you think your readers would be interested in?" And he said, "Yes." And he took it from there, you know? So we basically made this suggestion, gave a little bit of feedback about the range of topics, but then stepped back and we submitted our articles like anybody else submitted articles to the issue. And I think if you look at the issue, you'll see so many disciplines. You will see developmentalists, you will see applied behavior analysts who submitted articles. It's the full range of people involved in the lives of autistic and neurodivergent people. Any other, one other thing I think we should say is that there are some very practical
Mm.
applications and tips in some of the articles. So, for example, Noah McSweeney talks about how support people, some people call
Mhm.
them communication regulation partners, what they need to do to best support individuals on the spectrum. It isn't just about people's lives, even though there's a lot of that. It isn't just about how different disciplines interact and engage with non-speakers. There's some very much applicable information for those people who are looking for strategies and support strategies in particular.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I liked a lot of the healthcare professionals were very explicit about that. There was an article about what they were doing in a family medicine practice to support everything from longer appointment times to make sure non-speakers were unhurried and able to communicate and things. I know in the article my son co-wrote with his therapist, she talked about very specific things that she adjusted, but also things that she didn't change in ways in which working with a non-speaker was very typical. And I loved how there was a blend of that and a lot of the pragmatic suggestions of like, don't be so intimidated. This is just doing what you do with another population. And here are a couple of things, accommodations that just make their access to care or services a little bit easier. But like you said, Barry, it's in such plain language and pragmatic terms that I think a wide variety of audiences will find it very helpful.
Mhm. And I think with hearing of the journeys of so many of the contributors,
Mm.
it really does emphasize how courageous so many of them are, where given the frustrations, you could think, okay, let's just fold up shop and get out of here and no more. I can't deal with the world anymore. And unfortunately, we do know there are serious mental health issues for so many non-speakers. But on the other hand, people talking about what it was like when they were 3, 4, 5 years of age and not being able to communicate. And then finally, over time, when they developed more effective ways to communicate, the changes it made for them.
Right.
And I think just to kind of piggyback on that, because I mean, Barry, our thing, regulation, I think one
Oh,
of the things that the issue really highlights beautifully is, yes, supporting non-speakers regulation is important, like going in and making sure they have access to tools and strategies for regulation. But I think over and over again, in article after article, it comes through. If we support communication, there's so much less dysregulation that they don't need nearly the degree of regulatory support. And I think that is such an important part that comes out in many different ways in many different
yes.
articles. And I'm hoping that readers will take that away that here I am, I'm an OT and I'm a psychologist and I'm all about regulation, but like for our non-speakers, our primary way to support regulation is actually to get them a reliable way to communicate. If we get them a
Mhm.
reliable way to communicate, the dysregulation will be so much less, and we won't be kind of chasing after like an issue that shouldn't even exist if they had that communication way.
Though, I mean, I think that's a great point. You're right. I think regulation is foundational to a lot of this.
Hmm.
But I loved also the nuance in some of the pragmatic ways that regulation can affect
Oh, for sure.
communication, even
Oh,
for fluent
yes.
speakers,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Doctors saying if
It's
you've got somebody in pain, right, because they have a toothache or an ear infection, their communication is going to be more limited because it's hard to power through that.
yeah.
If you're in therapy and talking about a difficult moment, your communication might be slower as you struggle with the effects of that dysregulation. And so I agree with you that globally access to communication helps with regulation, but I think that's a human thing. I don't think
Yeah.
that's limited to non-speakers. I think all of us, when we get upset or angry or sad, we struggle more to
Mhm.
kind of articulate our thoughts. And I think given the apraxia and given some of the hypersensitivity on sensory issues, all those challenges are heightened with non-speakers.
Mhm.
You know what? It's just
Well,
the synapses are now finally connecting in my. Sometimes it takes a while. There's a lot of bacon grease that they have to
me
sift
too.
through. Okay.
Connect
So,
away.
so I've always looked at it as okay, the communication partner, support person, whatever, is there to help facilitate uh, just the communication. But my goodness, the importance of having a regulating presence is not only facilitating the communication, but is indeed improving it because we're cutting through what potentially could be the emotional noise of dysregulation. And so it's such an important role that no cell phone, no tablet, even your pen, if you're somebody who likes to write or whatever, like no AAC can regulate you in the way that a worthy partner can. That's a
I
very
think that's
important.
absolutely true. And I think Gregory Tino in the issue talks about his journey towards independent typing, but talking about having that trusted partner in the room, even when they're not holding anything, even when they're not speaking, having that calming presence for him is very beneficial. So I think you're exactly right, David.
For
Mhm.
anybody too. And I say that as somebody who gets pretty emotional and my I'll be so enraged by something that my hands are trembling as I'm composing just a killer text back to somebody, and Kristen will step in, my wife, and say, maybe don't send that. Just give that 2 hours, Dave. Take a walk and then see if you feel like sending that. And and
Yeah,
uh, that's the analog, right? Like we all need somebody there.
that's right.
It just helps us.
That's right.
Yes. Yeah. And where have I heard that before? Social communication plus emotional regulation plus transactional support.
If only
Somebody
there
should
were.
write something about that.
Almost like there's something to that.
Do you mean a framework? That would be a good idea. Maybe Barry and Amy, you two should work on this together.
Okay.
What if we took the first two letters of each of those things and put them together as an acronym?
There you go.
Is it skirts or certs?
It depends whether it's a formal event or an informal event.
Skirts and certs. It sounds like yeah.
Right.
And or if you're Scottish and you're never mind.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
So just a few conclusive comments here. I'd like to hear from everybody on this. What does the future hold? What do you think we need to focus on as we move forward? Because obviously, this issue of Autism Spectrum News and our discussion says, wait a second, we're just well past the yeah, it's real, no, it's fake arguments. And now we have to really look at the expansive future. And as non-speakers have to do that much more than even we have to do that. So, yeah. Well, one thing I could chime in quickly,
Go
and
for
then
it.
actually this is a shameless plug for the article that I published with Vikram Jaswal, who was the first author in 2026. And that is, let's look at the people who've become relatively independent
Yeah.
in their communication, and let's study their journeys on the kinds of supports they got to reach that point. So let's kind of do some reverse tracking.
Right.
And in other words, if something is really working, let's try to analyze what's working. I think we have ideas, but I think those natural histories could be very valuable.
I would agree with that. I was also struck in the articles that spoke about research in this issue with how many of them touched on exciting new tools that just didn't exist in for a previous generation of researchers, like talking about using functional MRI and very sophisticated eye tracking and portable EEG capture. Right? There's just a wealth of tools to study the brain now that didn't exist before, that I think can be so helpful in understanding what's effective, what's not in terms of regulation and comprehension and expression, that we can have multiple windows into what's going on here so we can try and diminish the barriers and kind of accelerate the things that are working for speakers. So I think I'm excited not just to see more research, but more research from a range of disciplines and using a range of methodologies to sort of broaden our picture of non-speakers.
And I think I'm going to take that and launch, right? So that research piece is so important because it provides an informational foundation for us. But we always need to be looking at it with an individualized lens, which I know that everyone on this call is really thoughtful about, and really to be able to focus on the lived experience. So some of that storied past that you're talking about, Barry,
Yes.
but also the research being informed by non-speakers and the application.
Yes.
And so I always pronounce his name incorrectly. Barry, PhD student at Vanderbilt, Hari
Srinivasan.
Savassanan, is that
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like he's got, I have a bit of a quote that I pulled in the article of my article in this issue where he talks about the importance of like not getting ahead with things like generative AI. Because like if he has a thought in his mind and then this like generative AI jumps in and tries to fill in his words, now he has to not only motor plan what he wanted to say, but now go back and correct what this thing said that he never intended to say, and then move forward, and how much effort that takes. So I think, that's one perspective. It's one very clear example, but like we should listen to non-speakers when they say, hey, you think this text prediction stuff is really useful. It
Yes.
actually adds communicative burden for me,
Yes.
right? Because we go, oh, that's great. You want to write that for me?
Right.
And he's going, no, you're writing what I don't intend. And now you've created more of a barrier for communication. So I think like the storied piece, Barry, about what's work in people's history, Jen, the thing
Yes.
of looking at the neuroscience and the motor components and understanding all that, and then making sure we keep that lens of the non-speaker to say, don't get ahead of yourself because
Right.
your brains aren't working the same way ours are. Let's interpret it through this lens is going to be so important.
Mhm.
And then I guess I would just add to that more generally, um, research, Barry, as you point out in one of your articles, research is one component
Yeah.
of
Right.
evidence-based
Yep.
practice,
Hmm.
alongside the judgment of experienced clinicians and the lived experience of non-speakers and their caregivers. And I would love to see a rebalancing of that three-legged stool, right?
Yes.
Because I think all three components are important, and also because research moves at a pace that's gated by funding and a lot of other things that should not act as additional barriers for letting non-speakers participate today. And I know this is a controversial statement for some, because some people want, proof positive in 12 peer-reviewed studies before we'll even entertain the notion. But when I think about what some of those non-speakers are saying, it's like, really, we're not going to allow someone to access therapy for mental health
Hmm.
because we don't have three peer. There's just things that they don't make sense in
Mm.
everyday life with the lens of common sense. And we talked about presuming competence. But I think in that same school of thought is the principle of the least dangerous assumption,
Yes.
right? And I understand that there are a lot of people who are worried about the risk of influence and things like that. But as David was pointing out, there's the risk of silence. There's a risk of not having access to healthcare, to mental health care, to things you need. And I think we need to balance those types of risks when we think about what to do while we're waiting for all the wonderful new research to unfold.
Yes. And that means not only getting back to the spirit of evidence-based practice, but in a sense, the letter of the law
Yeah,
of evidence-based practice as
yeah,
expressed by all major clinical and medical organizations.
that's right.
We can't ignore that. And that
Yeah.
actually, we could have discussed that up front as one of the misunderstandings of what
Yes,
Right.
of what
Yep.
indeed.
evidence is, right?
Right. Yeah.
Well, this has been a wonderful discussion. And I hope it lights the fire of some of our listeners to go online and really look at some of the articles, if not all of them, in Autism Spectrum News. And again, a tremendous thank you to David, the editor-in-chief of Autism Spectrum News, for taking this on. He knew it was a topic of controversy, but I think the range of articles and the range of contributors right away just kind of